So, yeah, these are the big takeaways from this here is that the due date is not next Friday, right? But the Friday after we come back from break. So you got the break and then another week to get it done. In general, I think it is rather dickish of people to assign things to be due during the break.
Yeah, I think this happen a lot. Like, what's the point of spring break if you're gonna assign things?
Because I mean, to be perfectly honest, like I don't want to grade things over the break either.
You don't want to do anything over the break besides sleep.
Yeah. But I will also I'll be home through most of the break. So if you have questions about things or anything you need to go over, is this buzzing?
Oh, after Friday, I'm not there.
Yeah.
If I have questions about anything, it's gonna wait till.
Okay, but yeah, just if you happen to have a question about it, I'll be answering email.
Yeah.
Also, there is going to be a vocab quiz. It's not going to be due this Sunday. It'll be due the Sunday right before we come back. And it's going to be on Death and the King's Horseman and this, first 70 pages or so of Midnight's Children.
Do you have like the recorded lectures on your with those two? Well, Death and the King's Horseman online.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, and Midnight's Children is what I'm recording. That's what we're doing today, so that's what I'm recording right now. So that'll all be posted. Yeah. And yeah, the only other thing I'm going to need you to do is just read about the next 65 pages or so of Midnight's Children on the break. So you're going to read the end of book 1. I see you were able to find your copy of the book.
Yeah, it was sitting in my back seat because I knew I threw books in the car as I'm packing things up. Where are you? I was just sitting there staring at me in my face okay. That's okay. Yeah.
All right. So I have plenty that I need to say about this. But how's this going for you so far? What do you think of Salman Rushdie?
I got the beginning of the story.
Okay.
It interests me because I read up to 36 pages yesterday, so I'm not about to read all of them within one day. And then I'm like, okay, cool, I understand it, then it lost me again. Did you marry your mom? Hello?
No. Okay, so yeah, no one married anyone's mom.
Okay, I was like, wait a minute, because I'm reading, and it's the one part he's looking at his mom. It's wait.
Okay, but it does keep kind of weaving in between what's going on with his mother and what's going on with his wife, right? Or with his wife to be, right? It's probably worth noting some things about this novel that might make some of it make a little bit more sense. And the first is just kind of to note something about genre, right? So the genre that Rushdie usually works in is called magic realism. Have you ever heard of this before?
I'm thinking fantasy.
Yeah.
Like Harry Potter and stuff like that.
Yeah, so magic realism is more kind of fantasy adjacent than actually fantasy though, right? So in a magic realist novel, right, you have what is essentially, right, a realist setting and style, right? So you get detailed descriptions of realistic looking people and things in identifiable real world situations. With fantastic elements mixed in. And those fantastic elements are also described usually in a very kind of dry, matter-of-fact, realist manner, right? In a typical magical realist novel, right, the characters don't seem to regard the fantastic things that happen as weird, right? Or even, in many cases, even all that surprising. And we haven't got to the really kind of densely magic realist parts of this yet, but we will, right? Like, things are going to get a lot weirder. And what we often get in magic realism are heavy doses of allegory and social commentary. So do y'all know what allegory is? Is this a word you guys are familiar with?
I know these drilled it in my head like a comp one.
Is it like a alluding or referencing something? Or is that another word?
I think you're thinking along the right lines. So an allegory is, a work in which every element or every important element references or symbolizes something specific outside the work, right? So, like, for example, in the first canto of Dante's Inferno, he meets these three beasts in the woods that are kind of stopping his progress, right? So he meets a wolf, a lion, and a leopard. And each of these three beasts is a specific symbol for a particular idea, right? They symbolize the three different categories of sin that the Inferno is then divided up into, right? So the wolf is sins of intemperance, right? Basically like lack of self-control. The lion symbolizes sins of wrath, and the leopard symbolizes sins of fraud, right? So, in an allegory, right, there will be a kind of direct one-to-one correspondence between characters or objects or events in the text and some other thing outside of the text. And in this case, what we're going to be getting allegorical references to primarily are things in Indian history and society in the 20th century, right? Now, the other important context, or well, one of the other important contexts that I want to start with here for Midnight's Children is what we call postmodernism. Now, I don't know if y'all have gone over postmodernism in theory or in other courses. Does this term ring any bells for either of you?
I don't think Dr. Dolan's mentioned anything about postmodernism.
Okay.
So I think this is the first time I ever heard it, unless it's for just literature or something like that.
Okay. Well, what assumptions can you make about postmodernism based on the term itself?
Before modernism.
Before or after modernism? Yes. So, postmodernism is usually used to refer to, say, post-World War II literature. And stylistically, what it tends to look like is a kind of freewheeling blend of genres and tones and styles, right? So a postmodern novel, I mean, it may freely mix prose and poetry. It may freely mix kind of like highbrow and lowbrow, or kind of high culture and low culture elements. It may also, include a number of different narrative voices. Now this in and of itself doesn't distinguish it much from modernism, right, which also does this. The big difference between modernism and postmodernism is that postmodernism is devoted largely to the subversion of the idea of any kind of secure knowledge. So, a postmodern theorist argues that we tend to understand history and culture in terms of what we call grand narratives. And if any of this starts to sound familiar to either of you, just feel free to chime in at any time, right? So these grand narratives are these kinds of like big, overarching, culturally unifying stories, really, on which our cultural assumptions tend to be based. So, for example, the idea of American exceptionalism, right? The idea that the United States is, somehow selected to be different from and better than other nations, right? Is an example of one of these kinds of unifying grand narratives. Now, what a postmodernist will do is try to poke holes in these grand narratives and break them apart, right? A postmodernist argues that these stories never actually survive sustained scrutiny. And in fact, that they're usually kind of composed in the interest of maintaining a particular status quo. And that once you start picking apart the grand narrative and breaking it up into lots of little petty narratives, and petty narratives are these kind of smaller, individualized stories within these grand narratives. These grand narratives are made up of, right? Once you start breaking it down into its petty narratives, you see that there's actually nothing there at the center, right? You reveal the hollowness of that grand narrative. And that's the basic method of postmodernism. And so Rushdie is applying this particular approach to a magic realist, fictionalized version of Indian history, starting with World War I, and working its way up to what would have been the present when the novel was published. So it's going to take us to about 1978. So roughly 31 years after Indian independence. Which I guess brings me to my next point. How much do either of you know about India or the history of India?
Little to none.
Okay. All right then. So.
I don't think they taught us about Indian history back in history classes.
Yeah, no, they don't. Yeah, they don't tend to give us much of that.
They don't give us a lot in history classes. I don't understand
Yeah.
what your purpose is.
Yeah.
America, they're not going to teach you.
Yeah,
It's called history.
if you have to take world history at some point, you might get a little bit of it, but probably not very much, right? It's
Like my freshman semester.
Mm-hmm.
I was a freshman in high school. They taught me nothing.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, we're kind of starting from basically scratch here, right? So because I simply do not have the time or space or bandwidth to teach the entire history of India to you. We're going to start just kind of with British India. So the British have a presence in India.
What don't they have a presence?
Well, they had a presence pretty much everywhere, yeah. But they've got a presence in India starting in about the 17th century.
It's British in there. There's somebody taking over.
And as is often the case with British colonialism, it starts with trade. Right? So there's a corporation called the East India Company that, like the Royal Africa Company, its contemporary, is formed in order to try to monopolize trade between Europe and India. And the East India Company trades, again, like in things like spices and tea and textiles.
You say have a monopolized trade with India, who?
Between India and Europe. So gradually, the East India Company kind of starts to run things in various parts of India, right? It's not necessarily an official government-led colonization effort. It's really more kind of corporate colonization. So that by the end of the 18th century, the East India Company controls most of the Indian subcontinent. And the means of control tend to vary from region to region, right? In some parts of India, the ruler is still a native prince who has made some kind of trade agreement with the East India Company. In other parts, the company itself is more or less directly in charge. So this kind of proceeds apace until 1857. When native Indian troops who had been enlisted by the East India Company revolt. And for several months, there's a good deal of violence and bloodshed across India. And at this point, Parliament asserts its authority, steps in, and just kind of takes direct control. And so we call the period from 1857 to 1947, when India is given when India is partitioned into a couple of different countries and given independence. The British Raj. And to give you some sense of what the extent of British India was. What's that?
The dang British popped up again. We popped up almost like.
Yeah, well, I mean, they used to call it the empire in which the sun never set. I mean, they were in every hemisphere, on every continent. So yeah, you can see here that this takes up the entire Indian subcontinent, plus some of Central Asia and some of Southeast Asia, right? So this,
Can you zoom in a little bit more? I can't see it from here.
what is it
I just
you
want
need
to
to
get
see?
a better look at it, basically.
Okay. So the British Raj included the modern nations of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Burma, Nepal, and Sri Lanka. Now, on top of this, there were also French and Portuguese controlled cities in India. Not to mention that India itself was a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-linguistic conglomeration, right? There wasn't a unified Indian culture. The dominant religion on the subcontinent was Hinduism, still is. The next largest religious group were Muslims.
I thought it was Judaism.
What's that?
I thought it was Judaism.
You know, there is actually a very small community of Indian Jews, but there are few in number, and most of them don't live in India anymore. However, you do have Buddhists, Jains, Sikhs, and Christians.
What were Jains and Sikhs?
Okay, so Jains are, I'm not entirely sure of the history of Jainism as a sect, but it's very much like a kind of, it's a very denial of the flesh kind of religion, right? In a variety of ways, right? Jains are strictly vegan. A big part of their religion is doing no harm to any living thing. So, like, they will sometimes, like, you know, wear face masks to avoid breathing in bugs, and will, like, sweep in front of them as they walk to avoid stepping on an insect. And yeah, they typically kind of deny themselves most material pleasures as well, right? So as you can probably tell, it's a relatively small religious sect. It takes, I think it's a philosophy that requires a very, very particular type of person, right, to follow. I think they also tend to be like kind of like radically pacifist. Although in some instances, particularly in conflict with other religious groups, Muslims in particular, because Muslims eat meat, Jains are sometimes, if this phrase even makes sense, militantly pacifist. Sikhs, you've probably seen Sikhs, even if you don't know that it was a Sikh that you were looking at. So if you've seen people wearing turbans with long beards, Indian men with turbans and long beards are usually Sikhs. And Sikhism is a religion that develops in the north of India, actually here it is, in Amritsar, which is where part of the novel takes place here as well. The Golden Temple in Amritsar that they talk about is the center of Sikh worship. Sikhism combines elements of Hinduism and Islam, and as a religion, kind of largely, the one principle is no alteration of the body, right? And that includes cutting beard or hair. So if, you know, like when a Sikh takes off his turban, his hair is, all of his hair is kind of wound up under that, right? Because yeah, the body is considered a gift from God, and you're not supposed to alter it in any way.
Well, too late on that one for me.
Well, you're not a Sikh, right?
I mean,
Yeah.
too late on that.
And yeah, they're very strongly community service oriented. They run things like community kitchens and things like that to feed the poor.
That's what
Things of
those
that
were.
nature.
I was wondering, so I've seen them when feeding homeless people and stuff.
Yeah.
I was like, I never knew
Mhm.
what religious that was. I thought it was just part of their style and stuff.
Yeah. No, it is for Sikhs, it's a religious obligation. Yeah. But yeah, so that's, the novel doesn't really deal too much with specific differences between a lot of these sects, right? Except we'll get into conflict between Muslims and Hindus later on, right? Again, like these are the two largest religious groups, and the two amongst which, between which historically there's been the most animosity. Where was I going with this? Oh, languages. So, India is also a region with numerous different local languages, right? So the most widely spoken languages, apart from English, are Hindi and Urdu. But you also have speakers of Farsi, what was the other one I was thinking of? Now it's completely. Okay, yeah. There's another language that's widely spoken that I just can't think of off the top of my head now. Yeah, so Hindi, Urdu, Farsi. There are also a variety of what are called Prakrits. And Prakrits are local languages that are kind of only spoken by a small number, by like people within a particular small region, right? So even people who might say speak Hindi in their interactions with outsiders may also speak a Prakrit when they're at home or dealing only with their own neighbors. And there's also Sanskrit, which is like, Sanskrit has the same kind of relationship to Hindi and Urdu that, like, say, Latin has to a lot of European languages, right? So it's not a language that anyone speaks as their native language, at least not anymore, but it still has a great deal of importance as a literary and religious language in Hinduism. And language is really loaded in India, right? There are a lot of conflicts over language. They're not going to be a big part of this first part of the novel, but they're going to come up quite a bit later on, right? And a lot of the conflict between Hindus and Muslims is also, it's a conflict not just over religion. In fact, one could argue that religion doesn't have really that much to do with it. That it is largely rather a conflict over socioeconomic class. In large part because at the time the East India Company started trading with India, India was essentially, all of this was what was called the Mughal Empire, and the elite were Muslims from Central Asia. A lot of Hindus still regard Indian Muslims as foreign invaders from somewhere else, right? And it didn't help that when the British took over in a lot of areas of India, Muslims who were already wealthier often became kind of like the native elite, right? And so yeah, so this conflict is largely about socioeconomic class and also about national identity, right? About who belongs to the nation and who doesn't. So when India is granted independence, on our narrator Salim Sinai's birthday, August 15th, 1947, most of the subcontinent becomes the new nation of India. However, the northwestern portion and the eastern portion, which is here labeled Bengal, become the predominantly Muslim nation of Pakistan. So India and Pakistan are arguably, they're, twins, right? Born on the same day, from the same parent. And this is going to be an issue in book 2. It's not something that's going to really come up yet, but it's something that is going to come up after Salim actually gets to describing his own birth. Yeah. So do either of you have any questions about any of this so far? I've thrown a lot of information at you. Okay. So, the novel itself starts up here in the northern tip of British India in this region that's called Kashmir. And Kashmir is important for a couple of reasons. One, it's a really good Led Zeppelin song. Two, it was one of those largely independent states when the British ruled India, and has remained to this day kind of disputed territory between India and Pakistan, right? Both of them claim it. It's currently legally part of India, but there's a good deal of conflict between the Indian military, the Pakistani military, and Kashmiri separatists who want an independent Kashmir within the province, right? And all of these tensions around 1980, when the novel is published, were really kind of coming to a head. But I think Kashmir is a starting point here, one, because it's where Rushdie's own family initially comes from. And two, because of its kind of outsider status in regards to the rest of the nation, right? It's a region that has, it's mostly Muslim, but it has kind of its own cultural identity. And a lot of that cultural identity is embodied in the novel in this figure of Ty the boatman and his relationship with Salim's grandfather, Adam Aziz. So, what did you think of this character, Ty? What's that?
I was trying to spell his name on the board. Adam, is he?
Yep, Adam. Yep, Adam Aziz.
I didn't tell there was 2 names.
Yep, it is, and yeah, and it is actually supposed to, the name is like the Arabic form of Adam. So yeah, so this is, again, like in that kind of allegorical tendency we see in a lot of magic realist writing, right? So the first of the line is Adam, right? First man.
Adam sound like a hard ass to me.
Okay, what made Adam sound like a hard ass to you?
I don't know, his character, it seemed to me, when I was reading, I'm like, okay. I don't know, his character just didn't seem like of my interest in a way.
What does Adam do for a living? What's his profession?
He did something with boats, on
Well,
Ty.
Ty is the boatman, right? Ty is the guy who pilots the boat. What is it? What is Adam Aziz's job?
He's a doctor.
Yeah. Yes, he is a doctor. And where has he learned to practice medicine? Where did he get his education? Yep, he did go to medical college. But where was that medical college? I'll give you a hint, not in Kashmir. It's printed on his bag. He attended university in Heidelberg, Germany. And this is in 1915, so he comes home early in the First World War, right? So let's look for a second here at the kinds of stories that Ty tells Adam when he's a boy, right? So Adam loves this boatman, right? Loves just getting on this guy's boat and listening to his stories when he's a child. We turn to page 11 here. No, tell Taiji, how old truly? And now a brandy bottle, materializing from nowhere, cheap liquor from the folds of the great warm chuba coat. Then a shudder, a belch, a glare, glint of gold, and at last speech. How old? You ask how old, you little wet-head, you nosy. Ty, forecasting the fisherman on my wall, pointed at the mountains. So old, Naku. Adam the Naku, the nosy one, followed his pointing finger. I have watched the mountains being born. I have seen emperors die. Listen, listen, Naku. the brandy bottle again, followed by brandy voice, and words more intoxicating than booze. I saw that Isa, that Christ, when he came to Kashmir. Smile, smile, it is your history I am keeping in my head. Once it was set down in old lost books. Once I knew where there was a grave with pierced feet carved on the tombstone which bled once a year. Even my memory is going now, but I know, although I can't read. Illiteracy dismissed with a flourish. Literature crumbled beneath the rage of his sweeping hand, which sweeps again to chugga pocket, to brandy bottle, to lips chapped with cold. Tai always had woman's lips. Naku, listen, listen, I have seen plenty. Gara, you should have seen that Isa when he came, beard down to his balls, bald as an egg on his head. He was old and fagged out, but he knew his manners. You first, Taiichi, he said. And please to sit. Always a respectful tongue. He never called me crackpot, never called me two either. Always ap. Polite, see? And what an appetite. Such a hunger I would catch my ears in fright. Saint or devil, I swear he could eat a whole kid in one go. And so what? I told him, eat, fill your hole. A man comes to Kashmir to enjoy life, or to end it, or both. His work was finished. He just came up here to live it up a little. Mesmerized by this brandy portrait of a bald, gluttonous Christ, Aziz listened, later repeating every word to the consternation of his parents, who dealt in stones and had no time for gas. Oh, you don't believe? Licking his sore lips with a grin, knowing it to be the reverse of the truth. Your attention is wandering? Again, he knew how furiously Aziz was hanging on his words. Maybe the straw's pricking your behind, hey? Oh, I'm so sorry, Babaji, not to provide for you silk cushions with gold brocade work, cushions such as the Emperor Jahangir sat upon. You think of the Emperor Jahangir as a gardener only, no doubt. Tai accused my grandfather, because he built Shalimar. Stupid, what do you know? His name meant encompasser of the earth. Is that a gardener's name? God knows what they teach you boys these days, whereas I, puffing up a little here, I knew his precise weight to the tola. Ask me how many mons, how many seers. When he was happy, he got heavier, and in Kashmir, he was heaviest of all. And so on and so forth, right? So, what do we notice about most of Tai's talk here? The kinds of stories he tells to Adam when Adam is a child. So he tells him the story about Isa, which is the Islamic name for Jesus, about the Emperor Jahangir, about Iskandar, who was Alexander the Great.
To me, it sounds like almost made up or like exaggerated type.
Yeah, I mean, it all sounds exaggerated. Like, what sounds exaggerated or made up about it?
But one, the bald part about this being bald, and then describing his beard and calling him old and just all the way he described him. It's just,
Yeah. Well, plus, the other thing to think about here is what year is it? And how is Tai talking about these people? One of whom lived, around, died in the year 33, right? One of whom lived in the 16th century, and one of whom died, I can't remember the exact dates on Alexander the Great, but we get the idea, right? And what relationship is Tai talking about these people as though he has with them? Is he talking as though this is just, like lore that he picked up from talking to other people?
he's talking like it's. The way he's talking about his first-hand experience, what it seems like.
Yeah, like he knew them, right? He describes having conversations with Jesus, right?
Yeah.
So Tai's talk presents him, in his talk, he presents himself as being kind of ageless and immortal, right? As having almost always been here. And as someone who will always be here, right? In fact, Adam Aziz refers to him at one point as being almost like a kind of familiar spirit of the valley. Whereas Adam himself, right, Adam is someone who has left and come back. And has come back with new methods and new ideas, right, picked up elsewhere. So if we turn to page 15, and we look at the way Ty talks to Adam now, right, to Adam the adult, the little boy whose nose, he said, contained dynasties. Now the adult doctor, right? Big shot. Ty is spitting into the lake. Big bag, big shot. Pop. We haven't got enough bags at home. He must bring back that thing made of a pig's skin that makes one unclean just by looking at it. And inside, God knows what all. Why is he fixated on the pig's skin, for example? Do you have any idea?
Huh?
Do you have any idea why Ty is fixated on the bag being made out of pig's skin?
Is it because of his religious belief?
Yes, right. It's an indicator that Ty is Muslim, yeah. So pigs are unclean animals.
Okay.
Dr. Aziz, seated amongst flowery curtains and the smell of incense, has his thoughts wrenched away from the patient waiting across the lake. Ty's bitter monologue breaks into his consciousness, creating a sense of dull shock, a smell like a casualty ward overpowering the incense. The old man is clearly furious about something, possessed by an incomprehensible rage that appears to be directed at his erstwhile acolyte, or more precisely and oddly, at his bag. Dr. Aziz attempts to make small talk. Your wife as well? Do they still talk about your bag of golden teeth? Tries to remake an old friendship, but Ty is in full flight now, a stream of invective pouring out of him. The Heidelberg bag quakes under the torrent of abuse. Sister sleeping pigskin bag from abroad full of foreigners' tricks. Big shot bag. Now if a man breaks an arm, that bag will not let the bone setter bite it and leaves. Now a man must let his wife lie beside that bag and watch knives come and cut her open. A fine business with these foreigners putting on young men's heads. I swear it is a too bad thing. That bag should fry in hell with the testicles of the ungodly. So what does the bag represent for Ty?
Animal cruelty.
What's that?
Animal cruelty.
Well, is it animal cruelty that's the issue? I mean, on the one hand, like, so for him, like, the fact that it's pigskin is problematic, right? Because he and Adam are both Muslims, and so, he shouldn't be touching a thing that's made out of pig.
I think it kind of signifies the fact that after leaving and coming back that he's changed,
Yeah.
that where he's been, it's not who he used to be, he's changed.
Yeah, and in bringing back all of these medical techniques from Europe, is Adam going to stop it just being changed himself?
I guess Ty thinks he's going to come back and try to, not force everybody else to change, but just spread what he's learned.
Yeah. And I mean, Ty, at least as the novel presents him, right, has kind of been in this place unchanged for centuries. And this little self-contained valley is now being invaded by modernity, by European modernity, right? So by foreign ideas and what Ty regards as foreign tricks. So Adam and his education are threats to the independence and the culture of the valley, right? which Ty will go so far to protect as he sees it, that he decides to stop washing. Apparently in order to drive the doctor out of the valley, right? Now the other thing I do want to make sure we talk about here is this weird courtship between Adam Aziz and the landowner's daughter, right, Nasim Ghani. What's weird about the way they interact before they're married? There's plenty that's weird about how they interact after they're married too. But in the way that they get to know each other. Let's go to page 18. Into a spacious bedchamber that was as ill lit as the rest of the house, although here there were shafts of dusty sunlight seeping in through a fanlight high on one wall. These fusty rays illuminated a scene as remarkable as anything the doctor had ever witnessed, a tableau of such surprising strangeness that his feet began to twitch towards the door once again. Two more women, also built like professional wrestlers, stood stiffly in the light, each holding one corner of an enormous white bed sheet, their arms raised high above their heads so that the sheet hung between them like a curtain. Mr. Ghani welled up out of the murk surrounding the sunlit sheet and permitted the nonplussed Adam to stare stupidly at the peculiar tableau for perhaps half a minute, at the end of which, and before a word had been spoken, the doctor made a discovery. In the very center of the sheet, a hole had been cut, a crude circle about 7 inches in diameter. Close the door, Ayat, Ghani instructed the first lady of wrestlers, and then turning to Aziz became confidential. This town contains many good-for-nothings who have on occasion tried to climb into my daughter's room. She needs, he nodded at the 3 muscle-bound women, protectors. Aziz was still looking at the perforated sheet. Ghani said, "All right, come on, you will examine my Nasim now pronto." My grandfather peered around the room. "But where is she, Ghani Sahib?" He blurted out finally. The lady wrestlers adopted supercilious expressions and, it seemed to him, tightened their musculatures, just in case he'd intended to try something fancy. "Ah, I see your confusion," Ghani said, his poisonous smile broadening. "You Europe-returned chappies forget certain things. Dr. Sahib, my daughter is a decent girl, it goes without saying. She does not flaunt her body under the noses of strange men. You will understand that you cannot be permitted to see her, no, not in any circumstances. Accordingly, I have required her to be positioned behind that sheet. She stands there like a good girl." A frantic note crept into Dr. Aziz's voice. "Ghani Sahib, tell me how I am to examine her without looking at her." Ghani smiled on. "You will kindly specify which portion of my daughter it is necessary to inspect. I will then issue her with my instructions to place the required segment against that hole which you see there. And so, in this fashion, the thing may be achieved." "But what, in any event, does the lady complain of?" said my grandfather despairingly. To which Mr. Ghani, his eyes rising upwards in their sockets, his smile twisting into a grimace of grief, replied, "The poor child. She has a terrible, too dreadful stomachache." "In that case," Dr. Aziz said with some restraint, "will she show me her stomach, please?" So what's going on here?
Basically, he has to see like a certain part of her body, or like he wants, like if you want to see her stomach, he wants
Yeah.
to show like that little small hole, like what, 7 inches? Yeah.
Yeah, they're holding up a sheet with a little hole in it.
So that's like any part of her, you just have to make his own interpretation, like what she looks like.
Yeah, so And this proceeds for like 3 years, right? Where he only sees her in pieces, depending on which part of her is ailing at that time, right? She never repeats an ailment. He never seems to see the same part of her twice. And he builds up this picture in his head of her, right, as a result of being just kind of like a bundle of parts. And why is it that he can only see her, inspect her through the sheet? Do either of you know what that means? Like,
I think it's a cultural thing.
it is cultural, yeah. So it's related to a practice called purdah. Which we're told Aziz's own mother has had to break because of his father's illness. She's had to come out of purdah to take over the family gemstone business. But yeah, purdah is essentially like the practice of isolating the women in the family from the eyes of strangers. Strange men in particular. And so to comply with this requirement while still getting the medical examination, she's kept behind this sheet. And this sheet becomes a kind of powerful symbol of the relationship between these two, right? So there are these 3 little red stains on it, because it's on this sheet that they consummate their marriage. And it's also related at the beginning of the novel to the lines from the Quran about how Allah created human beings out of clots of blood. So when you see these references to blood clots or rubies, right? We've also seen Adam Aziz drop 3 drops of blood out of his nose onto the ground, right? When he comes home, he's trying to pray, and, you know, as Rushdie puts it, the valley punches him in the nose, right? And Ty has said that Adam Aziz's nose contains dynasties, right? So there's something phallic about the nose there as well. But let's continue here to kind of like as Dr. Aziz is building up his picture of this girl whom he will eventually marry. All right, page 22. So gradually, Dr. Aziz came to have a picture of Nasim in his mind, a badly fitting collage of her severally inspected parts. This phantasm of a partitioned woman began to haunt him, and not only in his dreams. Glued together by his imagination, she accompanied him on all his rounds. She moved into the front room of his mind, so that waking and sleeping he could feel in his fingertips the softness of her ticklish skin, or the perfect tiny wrists, or the beauty of the ankles. He could smell her scent of lavender and chambouli. He could hear her voice and her helpless laughter of a little girl, but she was headless because he had never seen her face.
He has this very vivid image of what she looks like.
Sort
He has
of,
not seen her face
right?
like, at all yet.
Yeah, he's trying to assemble the parts in his imagination, but the parts end up headless, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, think for a minute about the map that I showed you a moment ago. where is Kashmir located in relation to the rest of India? Right at the top, right? Yeah, like almost like a head. And the fact that he uses the word partitioned here is also loaded. Right? Partition is what ends up happening to British India on August 15th, 1947, right? The various parts are broken up into different nations. So every time Rushdie uses the word partition, right, we should also think of partition with a capital P, right, in the partition of British India. And I think that at least like in this first part of the novel, there's also a sense that this didn't have to be the way things happened, right? That there's this idea that there were possible alternative futures, right? So the two dominant independence movements in India in the early 20th century were Mohandas Gandhi's Satyagraha movement and Satyagraha was predominantly Hindu. And was focused on nonviolent resistance to British authority, right? So, for example, Satyagraha protesters would initiate labor strikes, sit-ins. Sometimes they would even do things like lie across train tracks to try to disrupt trade or train traffic. What's that?
So Karens.
I'm sorry, I can't hear
They
you.
sound like Karens.
Really?
Karens will do basically sit on a train track just to disturb things and just have a really strong opinion about vegan and stuff like that.
Yeah, but for different purposes, right? So what Karens are, what the people we call Karens are often trying to do is like reinforce the culturally dominant narrative, right? Essentially, one of the reasons why we tend to make fun of or to dislike Karens is because they're punching down. Satyagraha protesters, remember, like were coming from the oppressed classes in British India. So they're actually trying to disrupt, you know, basically the Karens, right? Now, and let me just note that this movement was associated with Mohandas Gandhi. There was also a predominantly Muslim movement called the Muslim League that was led by a guy by the name of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And the Muslim League were essentially separatist, right? They were arguing for, they wanted independence from Britain, but they also wanted a separate Muslim state. In large part because they were concerned that within a Hindu majority nation, the rights of Muslims would not be respected. Now, Rushdie associates the Muslim League primarily with wealthy landowners who want to preserve a certain amount of privilege. And he opposes to this a fictional group called the Free Islam Movement under the leadership of this guy he calls the Hummingbird, right? Mian Abdullah. There was no Mian Abdullah, right? He's not a real person. And there was no Free Islamic League, right? That didn't exist. But he's using it as a kind of catch-all term for these other, these smaller groups that represent kind of other, more kind of ordinary people sorts of interests. And the Hummingbird and his group in the figure of the guy who doesn't end up becoming Salim Sinai's father, right? His mother's first husband, Nadir Khan, right? This is represented as a kind of like another possibility, right? And one thing I want us to be paying attention to as we read this is the way the novel sets up these possible paths, right, that could have led to something else. Right, so Nadir Khan could have been Salim Sinai's father, right? And if we think of Salim Sinai, as the novel intends us to, as a kind of allegory for India in the late 1970s, it would have looked very different had Nadir Khan been the father and not Ahmed Sinai, who was going to be Salim's father. Okay, so I know this is the last class meeting before break, and I've hit you with a lot of information. Do y'all have any questions about anything? Okay, so remember that there will be a vocab quiz. It'll be due the Sunday at the end of break, right before we come back. It's going to be on this and Death of the King's Horseman. And paper 1 revisions will be due on the 25th. Okay? All right, so let me give you the guide questions then for next time. And then we can all go home. Or, well, I can go home and the two of you can go to theory.
Oh, he canceled last night.
Oh, he did? Oh, well.
Oh, you wasn't there the other day. We had meetings instead of class today.